Hi there, guys. Welcome to our first of three webinars that's sponsored by Zamna. Great to have you with us. I'm very, very privileged to have three esteemed colleagues, I suppose I could call them in a way, within this industry joining us today. We've got Michael Hardin, Celine, Canu, and Alastair Trehard as well. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really, really appreciate your expertise and your insight. I'm Raoul Cooper. I've been working in the travel industry for too long, arguably 22 years to date, largely with British Airways, where I've worked in the IT side of things and more recently in biometrics and identity. I also sit on the board of the Biometrics Institute, very interested and keen in pursuing the ethical and responsible use of biometrics, all of which has become quite topical, shall we say, over the last few years. The advancements in both technology and the need for us to move to more and more of a digital world has become increasingly important, and we're having to work through that and work through technological advancements as we go. So in this webinar, which, as I say, is part of three, we're going to explore about how we've got to where we are today. And whether we are still fragmented or whether we're actually converging on a solution to the challenges of digital identity and international travel. That has all been spiced up with the advent of COVID and the immediate need to manage our borders in a slightly different way, with the consideration of health credentials and personal and private data involved in that. And these guys here who we've got with us will hopefully be able to reflect a little bit on that as well. We've got two other sessions that are coming a little further down the line. One is on the 1st of September, where we're going to look at the commercial implications to a digital identity. And then on the 1st of October, where we are going to start to change the world, well, continue to change the world. We're going to look at what we need to do to move forward from where we are with all things considered. So I've spoken for more than long enough, so thank you again for attending. Throughout the session, we're going to have the opportunity to ask questions to our expert panel here. And to do that, please go to Slido, so sli.do. And when you get there, you'll be asked for an event code, which has appeared on screen, 67600. Pop that in, you'll be able to see the questions that are being asked, and you can add your own question to that as well. I'd encourage you to add your name and the organization that you represent in there as well, and then we can share your question more freely than with the audience. I'll remind you of that as we go through. But to kick us off, what I've asked our amazing panelists to do is just give us a few minutes on their reflections of where we've come to with regard to digital identity and how we've arrived at where we are today, and then we're going to explore from there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Mike Hardin, who's director at CBP. Mike, do you want to introduce who you are, what you've done, and a little bit about your journey to get us to where we are today? Thank you, Mike.
Sure, thanks, Raoul. I'm Michael Hardin. I'm from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We are basically just the border agency for the United States. Our mission is sort of dual-faceted. We have a security mission. Our job is to make sure no one dangerous or nothing dangerous enters into the United States or gets on international cargo vessels. But we also have a facilitation mission. So we have a mission where it's our job to make sure people can travel lawfully, but easily. And so in a way that allows them to help the economy of the United States, of the travel industry, and have those benefits that come from international travel. So we had looked into sort of digital identity and biometrics. We had been working with biometrics for a long time, but it really focused on security benefits only. So our benefits to biometrics that we saw in our mission was basically we could ensure that people couldn't cheat the system in terms of swapping visas or using a passport that didn't belong to them or had a background that was dangerous to the United States, and we could catch them in advance of them entering. And that's great. But what we realized as we sort of got farther into the mission and as the technology advanced was that facial recognition allowed us to really build a better facilitation model without sacrificing any security issues. So we could build a travel system where someone could use their face to identify themselves instead of, say, a passport or boarding pass, and then go through not just the customs and immigration system that way, but also the travel system that way. And we could sort of act as an identity as a service provider, as a government agency for private sector airports and air carriers and other functions in the United States. And so that pre-COVID had paid a lot of dividends. We had a lot of really good results. We had a lot of happy travelers who liked the elimination of manual and paper processes, which were going to go away anyway. And we got to all this point by January, February of this year, before realizing that there was really another huge benefit to digital credentials, identity credentials, and face recognition and paperless travel. And that was the health reason. I was in Atlanta giving a privacy group a tour of our operations in Atlanta Airport. And this was in January of this year, where very few people had even heard of COVID-19. And we gave them the tour, and the privacy people asked a lot of questions of me, and they asked a lot of questions of Delta Airlines. And finally, they said to the Delta people, is there anything you would like us to know that you haven't told us already? And they thought about it, and they said, yes, there is actually. Our gate agents really appreciate that this sort of touchless process has health benefits, and we don't, it decreases our chances of getting sick, or our employees' chances of getting sick, because they're not handing documents back and forth all the time. And I sat there and thought of that, and I thought I'd never thought of that before, and realized that was an ancillary benefit to the things we were already building. And then 3 months later, I'm working at home along with everybody else in the U.S. and then in the world practically. So we have multiple benefits to digital identity, to face recognition, to biometrics that existed in the past. And then recently we've just added the health benefit, which is an enormous way that we can revitalize the travel and tourism industry and provide a safer and better travel system. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Comprehensive. Thanks so much. Celine, great to have you with us. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey to this point?
Sure.
Thank you.
So thank you, Raoul, and everyone. I'm glad to join you today. So I'm working for IATA, where I oversee the area of passenger process and facilitation. So as most of you will know, IATA is the trade association for the world's airlines. So we represent 290 airlines that altogether account for about 80% of the total air traffic. So we are looking at many areas of aviation activity and help formulate industry position, but also standard on critical aviation issues. And the area of facilitation is certainly one we are deeply involved. So as we are here today to look at the opportunities provided by secure identity management, I like to focus on the specific area of aviation facilitation. But first, let me go back in time and put some elements of our discussion into context, because our initiative started long before, and so back before January this year, our members' concerns regarding passenger process were twofold. First off, they were considering how to process more passengers within the given airport infrastructure and constraints, but they were also wondering how the passenger process could be further streamlined, and mainly in the area of document verification part. This to enhance passenger facilitation and obviously to reduce the overall process time. So these were based on some of the observation they had. The first one being that the expected air passenger growth and how to cope with it was at that time of a concern, because there are limits to how big airports can be, and how many new infrastructures can be built. Also, the passenger process had become inefficient, leading to ever-growing queues at some of the passenger touch points. If we think of the checking area, the immigration that Mike touched upon, the security checkpoint. Also, travelers were asked to repeatedly show their boarding pass and passport to various stakeholders, including the airlines, the security agency, border control, making thereby the experience very confusing. So really, passengers have a hard time to understand this bit and why there's so little coordination between all the actors engaged in the process. Also, from an IATA perspective, we've been reflecting on the results of our yearly survey, which is we run IATA passenger survey, which monitors, among others, the evolution of passengers' preferences and satisfaction. And there was an increasing demand for more technology uptake for airlines and airports to simplify the whole passenger process. So the introduction of biometric recognition, digital identity, and facilitate this overall process. Now the situation has somehow changed, and following the COVID-19 outbreak, these concerns still remain, with the unfortunate exception of the increasing passenger volumes, as you will understand. But the crisis has put forward an additional requirement from passenger, and Michael touched upon it a bit earlier, which is to increase, and we have a demand to increase touchless and contactless options. And we've run a dedicated survey among passengers after the crisis, and ask them some of the preferences, and they mentioned that once the pandemic has been contained and it's been declared safe to travel, about 84% of them would feel safer having touchless processing throughout the airport. This is also complemented by another 65% who would be concerned by handing over their passport, their phone, or boarding pass to any airline or airport official. So I can only join the comments done earlier on the Delta case. So to reflect on when we've been reflecting on those new elements, IATA has decided to refocus its efforts to accelerate its One ID initiative, and particularly in the development of industry standards to allow One ID type of solution to deploy at a faster pace. So One ID, for those who are a bit less familiar with the concept, aims at simplifying the passenger process by removing the needs for travelers to physically present their document in various combinations at the multiple touch points throughout the process, and replace it by instant biometric recognition. So it could be facial or any of the other biometric recognized by ICAO. So such a collaborative identity management solution between the public and the private stakeholders has to be also supported by strong data protection components, and this is critical to our project. So hence, One ID proposes to put passengers at the center of the process, so they can have more control of the data, over the data they share with the authorities, the airport, and the airlines, obviously. So overall, these progresses are very encouraging. At the meantime, we need to ensure that if we want to be successful there, we all worked collaboratively to design the standards that will allow the interoperability of the different variation of those 1ID trials and implementation. Really, and it's critical for us because the last thing we want is to have a passenger being asked to register multiple times with different stakeholders to facilitate their journey. I mean, that would simply defeat the purpose of the project. So I think today's discussion is a great opportunity to continue advocating for joint collaborative approach. I'm sure we'll have some burning questions about it today, and I'll be happy to take some of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Great to get the overview as well of 1ID and the progress that's being made there. We'll move on now to Alastair, who is an expert really around how governments work with digital identity. So do you want to talk a little bit really about how digital identity can be used to help governments really, any breakthroughs you're seeing there, or a bit of a reflection on what the next step might be? Thank you, Alastair.
Thanks, Raoul, and great to have the opportunity to speak today. So a lot of our work is with governments, public sector organisations, but also private sector and humanitarian development organisations, both in the UK and globally. And we're seeing challenges in terms of questions that people have in terms of investment in identity technologies, and what good looks like and how it can be effectively designed and built into the strategies and digital transformation that organisations have. I guess the other challenges that we're seeing at the moment are kind of what good looks like and how those products around digital identity and the underpinning components of digital identity, including biometrics, meet the kind of legislative, regulatory standards and best practice that clients are expecting for the digital identity to meet. And that's relevant, obviously, for the travel and airline industry, but also kind of more broadly across the whole economy. I think the other main challenge that we're seeing is how does that investment in digital identity and use of digital identity hello?
Hey, Alastair, can you still hear us?
Yes, sorry, it just cut out slightly.
Yeah, we can still hear you. You're good. Okay. Carry on.
Sorry. And the final thing is the challenge that we see often in the public sector, both in the UK and internationally, again, is how does an investment in digital identity mitigate the risks and threats that an organisation and the government sees around identity? So in the context of both identity fraud and cybersecurity. So in the UK government context, we've seen opportunities for the use of digital identity broadly across the public sector and across the economy. There's been an investment by the UK government around digital identity in many aspects of its work, both across travel, immigration, civilian and sort of law enforcement bits of the government. There are some particular sort of considerations for the UK government at the moment in the context of travel and related to COVID, which has already been mentioned. And how does digital identity and things like immunity certificates or health passports, as they've also been called, kind of come together and build on investments and initiatives around the use of digital identity to travel already, where parts of the industry have been looking at digital identity and the use of biometrics for a number of years, and how has that accelerated at the moment as a result of COVID. And I think what we're seeing with the UK government is more thinking around what are the right identity standards that should be utilised across the public sector and across the economy, and And that's relevant for digital identity in the context of whether it's the verification of someone's identity or the authentication of someone's identity, the use of biometrics, and what are the right standards in that context. And then how does that then interoperate at an international level? And I think the challenge and the opportunity for the UK government is probably around how does the legislative, regulatory and standards model for the UK develop and mature and work across sectors and industries in the UK, including obviously travel. And what investment does the UK government need to make around identity schemes that might be relevant for certain sectors, including travel, and then what might be relevant for a national framework around digital identity. So there are some of the challenges that we've seen and some of the opportunities and movement that we've seen within the public sector internationally, but certainly in the public sector and with the UK government at the moment.
Thank you, Alastair. That's great, really comprehensive. Actually, you covered a lot of ground there very succinctly, so thank you. So off the back of that, when we consider COVID, this is a question that's open to any of our panelists here. We consider what COVID has done in terms of changing our world, and then the needs and the demands it's placed on international travel specifically. It'd be good to understand your thoughts on whether the thinking in terms of advancements we need to do is actually accelerating our thoughts around digital identity and potential collision with biometrics, or whether actually it's moving us backwards because we're having to consider more and take stock of more. There's a fine balance in my mind between those two worlds. Do you think we're getting enough acceleration off the back of this, or are we actually potentially fragmenting? Anyone want to come in on that particular question?
I'll start. I think it's accelerating the trends to digital identity, and again, the whole movement in international identity and passports and immigration, this was all going to happen anyway. So, you know, as of 12 months ago, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is the UN organization that does passport standards, they were working on a passport standard for a digital passport, where a passport would start out to be both for physical and virtual, and then ultimately move to a virtual-only passport, perhaps in 5 or 10 years. That was already in train, on the tracks. We were getting started to look at those, and then COVID hit, and I think has accelerated that trend of the need to move away from physical documentation. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot to get there, and it's going to take a lot of collaboration between governments and private sectors. But I think that ultimately, COVID-19 is an accelerator more than a resistor.
Great, thank you, Mike. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm happy to echo Mike's comments, and as we are also looking at bringing more of the formalities of airports and make sure as much as we can that passengers are ready to fly before they arrive at the airport. It also means that the verification of the identity, its authentication, the validation of the travel authorization should be done before arriving to the airport. And this is currently not possible or very limited with the current e-passport. So we are really expecting the acceleration of the development of digital identity, specifically in the area of aviation. We know that there is currently one interoperable tool, which is the electronic passport, for which ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has developed the specification. So we are expecting a similar tool which provides the same advantages, but allows for more off-airport and remote operations. This is also very promising in the case of lost passport or stolen passport, and you can more easily provide emergency documents. So there are many benefits to it. But obviously, in the current context, we are looking at contactless options, and for airlines employees, they are also looking at getting less in contact with passport and any paper document. So yes, we hope that we think that there's an opportunity to accelerate the process. Nonetheless, we should be mindful that we are in a situation where the finances for each of the organization has been hit, and we need to balance it.
Thank you, Celine. Yeah, you hit on a few interesting points in and amongst that. I think there's something quite fundamental here about the coming together of what we do for international travel, which is obviously hooked onto passport, to what we need to do almost on a domestic basis, which is hooked into health. Now, my health record and my health identity is nothing like my passport identity. Indeed, I could have multiple passports legitimately. So is there a bit of a reset in our thinking here, or does, again, this point to us that actually the digital identity is the future, and we need to kind of almost let go more of passport and just focus on a single identity for a single individual? Alastair, you've been very quiet. Do you want to come in on that?
I was just thinking, sort of my answer will hopefully be relevant to both the questions that you've asked. I think that the trend is obviously accelerating, but the challenge for large organisations, I think, in the private sector and also for the governments in the UK, but also more broadly internationally, has been, digital identity is a thing, and people realise that it is a thing, but how do we make an effective decision in our investment in it? And I think there's been challenges certainly with the UK government in understanding how to accelerate, and perhaps some stuttering in before the acceleration actually occurs. But overall, there's obviously an accelerating trend. I think the UK government is acutely aware of the investment in digital identity required in terms of economically getting people back to work, from a health point of view, in terms of how does my digital identity support kind of improvement in efficiencies in health processes, but also then that being relevant to travel, when people need to prove their status and identity and health status to travel. And I think it's forced people to look at how investments in digital identity across the economy need to be done much more collaboratively. And whereas previously it was good, and it's important to look at the use of digital identity and biometrics in the context of travel use cases, because of COVID, it's accelerating thinking in how people need to work together and forcing those questions about, well, how does a passport enable me to do things outside of travel, and how does a digitalized version of that, how is that useful? But then also, how is that a component of a digital identity overall? So I think the theme that we're seeing is like a need for collaboration across interactions within the UK government, certainly.
Right, thank you, Alastair. So following on from that, then, if we think about some of the strains that will be that will exist in and around that, you've got the government wanting to understand identity more and more, and have good hooks into that to manage people in and out of the country, but also pick up on the social domestic strains they've got as well. That needs to be driven by industry, by different sectors, different verticals within the world, really, not just the travel one. And there'll be commercial interests in there as well. Is there a danger that with some of the solutions, some of the thinking that we're being anti-competitive? If an organization has done a lot of hard work with an individual to establish their identity, and that's then potentially being used to service their competition, is there a conflict there? What needs to happen in and around that world to make sure that we give a level playing field, and that we keep industry moving the technology on in the right direction?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best to answer that, but the biggest thing I would say is that only a government can create an identity. Only the government can sort of establish who you are and then have that be a trusted source of identity. A private sector, I mean, you know, your ID from Amazon or Microsoft is not going to be usable to other places. So I think that just from a creation point, and this is where the collaboration maybe comes in, is we have to sort of agree as a government and private sector community that governments are the source point for identities, and that ability to verify it should therefore be interoperable from private sector agencies beyond that point.
Thank you, Michael. Alastair, do you want to come in on that as well? Or you?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that we've seen in the UK is kind of identity, and the creation of digital identity is often related to people having a driving license and a passport. And you know, there's probably 25%, or there is 25% of the UK population that doesn't have a driving license and passport. So naturally, sometimes a model that reflects access to data from both the public sector and the private sector is probably going to be key to the creation of digital identities. And the challenge for, I think, the UK government is making available other data assets to enable digital identity to be accurately created for certain parts of the population that don't necessarily have a passport or driving license for whatever reason. So kind of social inclusion, I think, needs to be a key focus for the creation of digital identities. Otherwise, there will, I think, will be challenges in terms of people's ability to have a digital identity that they can use across the economy. So I think perhaps the challenge is to, again, kind of enable the collaboration between the public and private sector, but certainly meeting government standards and a framework around digital identity.
Great, thank you, Alastair. So is that framework and those standards, does that need to come first? And the reason I asked that question is we've seen in recent times that there's things like biometrics and facial recognition, which has taken a bit of a pounding in certain areas for either the right or the wrong reasons, depending on the use of that particular technology. Indeed, we've seen in the UK with track and trace a bit of contention in and around the government. It becomes political in this sense. So is there what's the dangers that sit around this world where you potentially got government and private sectors linking up to do something for the greater good, but potentially being misconstrued? How do we protect ourselves and make sure that we keep moving forward? Is it based on those standards? Is it based on transparency and things like that? Celine?
As it comes in I think we are discussing digital identity at large, and certainly all the options are open depending on the end use of this digital identity. When it comes to international traveling, we need to have solid standards in place so that each and every country where the passenger will travel will recognize the digital identity. So what are the components we might have as part of this digital wallet? The digital travel credential that ICAO is developing together with maybe other elements that come from the private sector, but we need this piece of standardization you were referring to, Raul, and I think to me it's critical if we want to allow passengers to continue traveling from one country to the other without having to demonstrate that their proof of identity has been issued by the right sector, and that this sector or organization can be recognized. This is already quite complicated in the case of electronic passports, but ICAO and its member states have done a tremendous work there, and now this construction of a digital wallet would be interesting because you can add all the elements that you want. In the context of aviation, we need additional papers or proof of such as the travel authorization or the vaccination sometimes, and it might come, it might be reinforced in the future should there be a vaccine that would cover COVID-19. So those elements could be then introduced in this wallet. And I think as we are looking at a decentralized solution, it would also allow passengers to share the piece of information they need or they have to with the appropriate authorities. I mean, I think most of us in the webinar and listening today are travelers, and we don't necessarily want to share medical information with airlines or airports, and alternatively, airlines do not necessarily want to have this information because they are not medical experts and cannot say whether a person is fit to fly or not when it comes to viruses. But instead, it can allow the appropriate authorities, so the CDCs, to make an assessment and provide a green light or good to go. The same with travel authorizations, or for the authentication of the digital identity. So they are, I think, promising, and although there are lots of concerns around the development and deployment of digital identities, I think there are also a number of opportunities in this area. Letting passengers in the context of aviation and aviation travel just let and share the information on a need to know, need to access basis. But certainly standards should come first, or at least minimum data elements and with some specification that countries are comfortable with to ensure the interoperability.
Right, thank you, Celine. Yeah, so we've got the governments and the standards potentially setting out what we need to do to cross a border and do that in a safe, secure manner. We've got then potentially other parties providing services that help reinforce that might be providing credentials of things that you might have done for testing or immunization or other services that have got a commercial aspect to it. Do you think that we're doing enough to respect those commercial pressures and the commercial elements there, so that company A who does something for their customer within their loyalty program, for example, can be protected within that loyalty program, work with the international community to get someone across the border, but still remain within that commercial bubble? Or have we got a conflict here that says that actually that information, once it's made into a wallet or something on those lines, can just be reused by any? And what are the commercial implications that might come off that? Is there a problem here that you guys can appreciate or see?
I can certainly see the challenge for companies that have invested in their relationship with their users and with their customers, and where that trust that they built up and that relationship is then kind of reused in another setting. And I think the challenge for companies doing that on a bilateral basis, I guess, is to create the right commercial model. And perhaps we've seen movement where groups of companies have started to obviously work together to create schemes around the reuse of digital trust and the reuse of digital identity. And perhaps we're seeing the likelihood of schemes being created that are for certain sectors. So there's initiatives going on within the public sector in the UK and financial services and other parts of the economy in the UK, where people are thinking about the reuse of trust and reuse of data checks and identity checks, where they're trying to build a commercial model, but that's often very focused on a specific sector. So perhaps there's kind of broader thinking required on how that commercially works across sectors?
Yeah, thank you, Alastair.
I think what's going to bring this,
Mike.
What's going to bring this to the forefront, I think, and partially is just the concept of health or vaccination against COVID. I mean, you can think, and we have thought about, what are the implications when there's a vaccine, about how do you digitally attach some kind of vaccine that's able to be certified remotely to an electronic digital identity that therefore you could use to cross a border. So in other words, you could use some type of attached digital process. The CBP could verify with whatever health agency in Europe vaccinated the passenger, and therefore you could facilitate that person's travel. Well, that can exist, and it can also exist in all kinds of other contexts. So you look at, like, could you have a vaccination requirement to enter a movie theater or a sports stadium or some other concert or a venue, something like that? I think that you're looking at all kinds of use cases where a digital identity could be connected to an external sort of health credential of some kind that could be used in all kinds of private sector contexts. And I think that is the use case to me that's going to bring a lot of these questions up as far as what's acceptable to share between the passenger and the private sector and the health agencies, which might be government, and sort of pull those issues out. I think it's just so urgent.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We've got a question actually that's come in from Stefan from Sequoia, and it kind of talks to this a little bit, really, and what we need to do to ensure these sort of things can come together. And he asks, what can be done to assure support by the broad public to support border management and COVID testing when concerned about tests being genetically tied to the IDs? So potentially having this link of something to do with medical and identity to do with crossing a border. What can be done to appease concern in and around that area? Is there thought process happening? Mike, is that a concern for? To
me, I think that just limiting it to COVID for a second, I think that the key thing to do is just make it a binary decision on the credential, right? So it's either yes or no. Either you've had this vaccine that has been defined and is universally acceptable as a vaccine, or you haven't. And that's the only sort of information that is stored as a credential digitally. So I think the first step is to limit the type of information that you store digitally on a identity credential.
Maybe also one of the elements, I mean, we've seen that a number of countries have set up portals dedicated to contact tracing, and also they use the option for passenger to inform about some potential medical conditions, or if they had been exposed to COVID themselves, or to people having been infected by COVID. And in such a case, the digital identity can be then used to confirm the person's credential on this portal, but not necessarily the way around, where this information would be inserted in their digital identity. I mean, we need to make sure and also explain people that then they will not be labeled by their medical conditions, and this should not, although they should be linked, but it should not be a permanent information linked to it. So we see more the digital identity coming and being used to confirm that the information entered on a different and secured portal can be validated, rather than inserting it into the wallet. And it's a very good question and critical for, I mean, if we want to bring confidence to passengers. We know that they don't want to beat health condition or others, but
yes, That's quite right. And I think this kind of, and that's another question in here that is linked to that. If we think about track and trace, so where a customer or citizen might have been before they've arrived at port X or Y. Again, how should we work with the digital identity and that sort of information? Is there a requirement to digitally track where people have gone, or is it should it remain a place where customers and citizens will declare, this is what I've done and this is where I've been? Can we just trust people and citizens?
Well, I don't have the full picture on it, but I've been looking at few cases where such options were available to passengers, and not only passengers. I mean, we are talking about everyone, and if we want the measures to be efficient, they should be adopted by the whole population of a country, including the resident and those who come in and out. And usually the uptake of such apps or solutions is not so high. And we know there are also gaps. If you want it to be efficient, you need to have been in contact or in close contact of the person who themselves would have the app and on. And so this apart, it gives us also an idea that people might not be fully comfortable with such a solution. So the default option is really to trust them and declare to the best of their knowledge where they have been and who they have been in contact with. Now we have to keep in mind that it's an additional layer within a well-structured approach. And in many instances, the other elements of the layers include other preventive measures such as physical distancing or wearing masks or washing hands. And so this is one of the elements among the others. But definitively, I mean, tracking might be difficult. Tracing and asking passengers, citizens to provide some contact details, basic, so that they can be reached out in case of we need to forward some information, is definitively useful. Yes.
Great. Mike, do you want to come in on that as well, or is that a bit too potato?
Yeah, I think that what I was thinking about when you asked the question is, a lot of the data certainly exists to create a system like that. If you pulled it all together, right? So you could identify a certain person, you could identify what flight they were on, you could identify what seat they were in, who was sitting nearby. The data certainly exists. I'm not sure, or I'm pretty sure there isn't sort of a passenger buy-in, at least at this point, for the use of that kind of information to be shared around, unless he sort of anonymized it, where you could tell other passengers on the plane that they'd been in contact with a COVID positive patient potentially, as opposed to identifying who that specifically was. But I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there about the acceptability from a passenger perspective of that kind of use of data. But it's possible. Yeah, indeed. I think there's definitely room in and around this area for a different approach to the problem that does help preserve those questions or worries about privacy. And let's not pretend that there's absolute trust in all governments worldwide. I'm sure there'll be some instances where customers will go, actually, I'm not sure I want to give certain information, that it might be used in a different way. So if there are ways in which we as industry leaders can rethink the problem, I think we should be thinking around that as well.
Great. Celine, a question came in. It's a nice, easy question for you, actually. This is probably the easiest one of the day. Is there a reference to the yearly review on of your members, and is that available publicly? And if so, can we share a web link?
Is there a reference to what, sorry?
To the yearly review that you referred to in your introduction about trends and
yes.
And so forth.
Yes, indeed. IATA.org passenger survey. You will find a link to it. So as I mentioned earlier, so we have a yearly service, which is useful as we can monitor the trends and see the evolution, and notably the traction for biometric recognition, digital passport, contactless, paperless options. And we have some additional information. Now we've run separate surveys run during the period of COVID. So yes, I can try to, I can share a link if it's possible. I'll look with the organizer, otherwise Google it, search engine, IATA passenger survey, GPS.
Great, thank you, Celine. I think Google is your friend, as I used to say, so we'll definitely go for that.
I'm not even sure we don't say Google it.
But we'll pop out a link as well for that. A couple of other questions came in. I'm just reading them off the press. One from Ciaran from Intervistas, referring to Mike's comment that, for example, vaccination info could be added to digital identity. How do we avoid that each country comes up with its own solution? Something that I imagine is very, very pertinent now, with a domestic agenda being the prevalent agenda.
Yeah, that's incredibly difficult. There's a few international groups that are trying to work on this issue. There's one in the World Economic Forum that we've been in contact with that are sort of trying to bring people together to prevent that from happening, that point. So it's a big challenge. It's tough. The governments have so much internally to worry about now between the economic fallout of COVID and just the health problems directly. So it's tough to find an international group that can really focus in on this one. So I'm hopeful that someone can sort of take the lead and get other governments and countries to follow. I think they're a good a group as any. And so I'm hopeful that they can kind of come up with something that makes sense. And I think that the big challenge is going to be, what's the international standard for health credentials? So in other words, what constitutes a negative COVID test? What constitutes an acceptable vaccine that is recognizable in an international context? And that's that's a real challenge. And I found when I was on one of the phone calls, we were joking that I have a career in border and homeland security and counterterrorism and things like that. I've been working on health issues for a month, and the person I'm talking to has been working on health issues their whole career, and just working on border issues for a month. So there's a lot of cross-pollination of information that we need to bring together, and bring together some good thoughts about how we can build something like that. But I think the questioner is right that it's a huge challenge to prevent multiple standards or multiple projects from getting too far. I think it's in the early stages, you're probably okay, and maybe they can combine as things progress. But you don't want more than one to really take a big root.
Yeah, you're quite right, Michael. Thank you for that. So as we kind of head towards those, the need to get to some sort of standard, we need people to take the lead, don't we? We need groups to prove value, and that could be a combination of both government, airport, airline, private sector, and so forth. So with that in play, can you see some really interesting stuff bubbling up at the moment? Are we really hitting the mark in terms of that? And are we considering all the players in there? Like Mike said, you're going to have people who are experts in infectious diseases and the right sort of health things that are there. You're going to have experts in aviation. You're going to have the commercial world as well, who have got to protect their interests as well. Can we come to a place where those can all play nicely together? And who's getting the value out of the collaboration? Celine.
Yes, I hope. But it's for now it's quite complex because of the fact that a number of organizations or people who are not necessarily familiar with the world of aviation are also discovering it and do not necessarily always have the understanding of the complexity of some of the system and the processes. We see that it can also bring challenges and not a solution that looks great on paper in practice and in an airport environment where time pressure is there is not necessarily ideal. So it's important for all the organizations to sit together and continue having this collaboration and discussions about what are we trying to do and how best to do it. And ICAO has been organizing such platform until now, and they did a tremendous job gathering medical experts, aviation experts, industry representatives, and we need to continue and foster this collaboration. Otherwise, we run the risk of having passengers needing to check information on 10 or 15 websites and look whether which tests he has to do in his country of departure, which is usually a bit easier, but also in the country where they will spend their holidays or they will have their journey, which is usually more complex because you don't necessarily know the place, speak the language, and there's a cost to it. The minimum, the tests we see are usually around $150, $200, multiplied by the number of family members traveling together. I mean, whichever measures we want to take, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the passenger. How practical will it be to travel? How affordable will it be to travel? Otherwise, we will just run the risk to kill the industry and the opportunities for people to travel. And I mean, that's a critical element. So standardization, collaboration are critical at this point, and really understanding each other's needs and yeah.
Right. Thank you, Celine. That was a good round out there. And we've come to our last couple of minutes. So I'm going to ask for closing comments from each of you. Thank you, first of all, so much for spending the time with us this afternoon. And thank you to the audience as well for asking good and pertinent questions. So so please, we'll start with Alastair. I'll work around my screen. We'll start with Alastair. Closing comments about how we achieve this collaboration, both from a passenger and from a commercial and value add point of view. 30 seconds.
Obviously, we talked a lot about collaboration, but I think in this sort of crisis around COVID and the use of digital identity, I think it is all about collaboration. And I think that's in many ways, one, it's public and private sector, academic sector as well. It's between the UK and the rest of the world, but it's also across, I think, functional areas. So a lot of the work on digital identity historically is about technical collaboration, technical standards, but it's also about creating the right business and legal models around digital identity as well. So it's different people from different aspects coming together as well that I think is going to be important in benefiting from digital identity.
Thank you, Alastair. Good summary there. Celine, do you want to do a final 30 seconds then on your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, there are many questions that we've touched upon today, and I sense that we would need another 4 or 5 hours to dig deeper. But it's, I mean, it shows that there are many opportunities to simplify the process, be it in the context of aviation and outside. But we need to have it right. And if we wanted to benefit to also having it right, and includes, as Alastair mentioned, the regulatory framework, but also the standardization and all the data privacy element around it. And I sense we are at a turning point where this digital identity can really make a difference and support the industry and the society as a whole. So we need to make up our mind, and it's now that most of the elements will be decided.
Thank you, Celine. So Michael, 30 seconds on how we're going to get it right and on the global scale.
Okay, I would say I think digital identity is the future. Whether you're a government or whether you're a private sector agency, the best thing you can do now is start thinking about how it fits into your mission and your business model, and start working with other representatives in the industry and other governments to see how you can collaborate. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Superb. We've run out of time, but thank you again to Michael, to Celine, and to Alastair. Really appreciate your insight and your valuable contribution this afternoon. We've got another session on the 1st of September, where we'll be delve a lot deeper into the commercial implications, which we've talked a bit around today, but we can go a lot deeper on that. Say, well, actually, those who are spending the money, investing the money, who are going to make the difference, how does that actually come to life, and how are their interests preserved, as well as meeting the customer needs? So we look forward to you joining us again. There we'll have a new set of experts who we will bring into that session. We hope you've enjoyed it. Any feedback, please do just drop us an email or follow the links that will come out from Liddy, our organizer for this event. Thank you once more to our panelists, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care for now.